She fell once on the ice, and the most feared man in the city decided she would never fall again. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe. Snowflakes swirled through the air like bits of shimmering confetti as Ivy wove through the crowded Christmas market, juggling 3 gift bags, a thermos of hot chocolate she deeply regretted buying, and the naive belief that flat boots would keep her safe on icy cobblestones. They did not. The market buzzed with holiday cheer, children tugging their parents toward toy stalls, couples sharing pastries dusted with powdered sugar, street musicians playing carols that warmed the air even as the wind bit at exposed skin. Ivy tried to soak it all in, reminding herself that she loved this season, that she loved the magic of it, even when she was running late, sweating under 4 layers, and carrying far too many gifts. She swerved to avoid a giggling toddler in a reindeer sweater, stepped onto a patch of sparkling snow, and her foot slipped clean out from under her. The world tilted. Gift bags flew. Hot chocolate arced through the air in a tragic brown spray. Ivy flailed her arms, a helpless noise escaping her throat as gravity claimed her with icy enthusiasm. But she never hit the ground. A hand, large, firm, shockingly warm, closed around her waist. Another caught her wrist before it could slam into the pavement. Ivy found herself suspended, chest pressed against a solid wall of heat that definitely wasn't a lamppost. Someone had caught her. Her breath puffed in a white cloud as she blinked up, her eyes adjusting to the golden glow of the market lights behind him. And then she saw his face. Sharp jaw, dark hair dusted with snow. Eyes the color of late-night storms. Gray, intent, consuming. He was breathtaking in a way that made her heart stutter painfully in her chest. But it wasn't his beauty that stole her breath. It was his expression. Concern, real, raw concern, sharpened his gaze, as though her fall had been something catastrophic rather than embarrassingly clumsy. His grip tightened for a moment, ensuring she was steady before he slowly, reluctantly, helped her stand upright. "You all right?" His voice was low, rough, and melted through the cold air like something forbidden. Ivy opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She cleared her throat, tried again. Yes. I think so. Oh, no. Your coat." She gestured helplessly to the dark wool, now splattered with her hot chocolate. He didn't look down. He didn't even blink. He was looking at her. Really looking. As if she were the only thing in this entire bustling market worth noticing. Her stomach flipped in a way that had nothing to do with slipping on ice. His gaze swept over her face, checking for injuries. "You could have cracked your head open." His tone softened dangerously. "You shouldn't be carrying so much alone." "I'm fine," she insisted, though her voice wobbled enough to betray her. "You're shaking." "That's just humiliation." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, small but devastating. It made him look younger, warmer, almost approachable. Almost. He bent to retrieve her fallen gift bags and handed them to her with a care that felt far too intimate for a stranger. When their fingers brushed, a spark shot straight up her arm, and she nearly dropped everything all over again. "Careful," he murmured, steadying both the bags and her. "I'd hate to see you fall twice." Her heart hammered. She couldn't look away from him. Who was he? Before she could ask or flee, the crowd shifted around them, pushing them closer. His hand returned to her waist instinctively, anchoring her like he'd been doing it for years instead of seconds. "You should watch where you step," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear it. "Ice is unforgiving." Ivy swallowed. "And you just happened to be here to catch me?" His eyes darkened, something unreadable flickering there. "Maybe," he said softly. "I was meant to." Her breath hitched. A stranger shouldn't look at her like that. A stranger shouldn't touch her like that. A stranger shouldn't feel like fate itself had intervened to put him in front of her. But he did. And as the snow continued to fall and the market lights glittered around them, Ivy felt something she hadn't felt in years. as though slipping had done more than make her fall. It had made her land exactly where she was supposed to. The realization didn't hit her all at once. It came in pieces, tiny, breath-stealing pieces. First, it was the way strangers in the market subtly shifted when they walked by him. People who'd been bustling and cheerful a moment ago stepped aside, as though guided by instinct, giving him a wide berth without ever looking directly at him. Second, it was the stillness. Not hers. She was flustered chaos in boots, but his. Luca Moretti stood like a man who never needed to check over his shoulder, because anyone foolish enough to approach him with ill intent had already been dealt with long before they got the chance. And then it was the whispers. Soft. Fast. Nervous. That's him! God, why is he here? Did you see who he's holding? She's either doomed or chosen. Ivy didn't register the words individually, only the sharp change in atmosphere. Joyous holiday chatter turned into a murmur of unease swirling around them like cold wind. As if the entire market had suddenly remembered something about the man who held her steady. Something she should have known. Her pulse skipped. Luca noticed instantly, his gaze flicked down to her lips, then back to her eyes. Observant, focused, disproportionately attentive to the tremor that moved through her. You recognized me, he said quietly. Not a boast, but an observation layered with something unreadable. Ivy swallowed hard. I think I have. His lips curved in a slow, devastating line, amusement and warning tangled together. And what exactly have you heard? Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. She couldn't say the truth. Not to his face. Not while his hand was still resting on her waist, as if claiming the right to keep her upright. Still, her voice betrayed her. That you're Luca Moretti. A simple name, but in this city, it carried weight like a thunderclap. The air shifted around them, the way it did when lightning wanted to strike. Luca's expression didn't change much, barely a flicker, but she felt the shift inside him. Like a door had opened, revealing a darker room behind his eyes. And does that frighten you? He asked softly. Ivy's breath hitched. Should it? He leaned in slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for her to feel a warmth she shouldn't feel from a man with his reputation. His voice ghosted her ear like a winter breeze that somehow burned. Only if you believe everything you hear. Her heart thumped hard enough she was certain he felt it beneath his fingertips, because his touch was still there, grounding her, protecting her, refusing to let her fall. Too soft for a man whispered about in fear, too careful for the monster the rumors described. Ivy forced herself to meet his eyes fully, searching for the menace, the ruthlessness, the cold emptiness people associated with his name. But that's not what she found. His gaze held nothing but focus, sharp, unyielding, and confusingly gentle when it landed on her. You handled me like I might shatter, she whispered half to herself. His brows lowered slightly, confusion softening his harsh features. Of course I did. As if you weren't who you are. A shadow crossed his expression, and for a moment he looked almost offended. Who I am, Luca murmured, has nothing to do with the fact that you were falling. The simplicity of the statement stole her breath. He tightened his hold, not possessive, not invasive, simply ensuring her balance, as if she were made of something delicate the cold might break. People feared this man, shuddered at his name, avoided his gaze. Yet he was brushing snow from her hair with a thumb so gentle she felt warmth bloom in places winter had no right reaching. You're trembling, he said softly. I'm overwhelmed. He smirked, not arrogant but knowing. By nearly falling? Or by me? Her cheeks burned. Both. His gaze flickered with something that made her heart thrum with dangerous curiosity. Good, he murmured. That means you're paying attention. And before she could respond, before she could gather her scattered breaths, Luca stepped even closer, lowering his hand from her waist, only to take her bag-laden wrist carefully in his grasp. "You're not walking alone from here," he said, "not while the ground insists on betraying you." It wasn't a question, or a suggestion, or a flirtation. It was a promise, spoken by the man everyone whispered about, and softened by the man only she seemed able to see. Ivy managed to gather herself, barely. Her heartbeat still stumbled every time she replayed the moment she'd slipped, and the way Luca had caught her like she was something precious, something breakable, something he refused to watch crumble in the cold. But she needed to walk away, put distance between them, breathe air that wasn't thick with his scent or the weight of his eyes. So she cleared her throat, straightened her coat, and forced a polite smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "Really, I'm fine now. I should get going." Luca didn't move. He didn't release her wrist. He simply looked at her, a slow, unreadable study that made her feel like he was memorizing her face for reasons she didn't understand. Or maybe didn't want to. "Ivy," he said quietly. She hadn't told him her name. Her breath hitched. "How—" He tilted his head slightly, a hint of amusement flickering in his storm-gray eyes. "You dropped your receipt." Sure enough, poking out of one of the gift bags was a crumpled piece of paper with her name printed on it. Heat rushed to her cheeks. "Right, well, I should—" She stepped left. Luca stepped left. She stepped right. He mirrored. "Why?" she asked, flustered. "Are you following me?" "Because you'll fall again." Ivy blinked. Twice. "I won't." "You will. I have survived ice before." "That was before today." Her jaw dropped. "You think I'm that incapable?" A pause, then without an ounce of shame. Yes. It should have irritated her. It should have made her shove past him and stomp away like a rational woman with dignity intact. But the way he said it, so calmly, so seriously, like he was stating a simple fact of physics, pulled a startled laugh from her lips. His expression softened at the sound, almost imperceptibly. Luca Moretti liked her laugh. Oh no. She stepped around him, carefully this time, adjusting her bags. The market lights sparkled overhead, painting Luca in warm golds and cool silvers. Too beautiful for someone so dangerous. "I'll be careful," she insisted. "Thank you again." She began to walk. Footsteps followed a second later. Firm, certain, close. Ivy whirled around. "You're still following me." "Correct. There's no reason." "There is," she exhaled sharply. "Which is—" "You'll fall again." "Luca!" He finally stopped, hands slipping into the pockets of his dark coat, expression infuriatingly calm. "I'm not following you," he said simply. "I'm escorting you." "That's the same thing." "Not when I'm doing it." Her mouth opened. No words emerged. How was she supposed to argue with that level of logic-bending confidence? Luca closed some of the distance between them, but slowly, as if giving her time to flee if she wanted to. She didn't move. "You're carrying too much," he said, voice dipping low, intimate in a way that made her shiver. "Your balance is off. Your boots have no traction. And you walk like you're trying not to take up space." She bristled. "I do not!" He leaned in just enough that his breath warmed the air between them. "You shrink yourself," he murmured. "People who do that fall without meaning to." Ivy stared at him, throat tight. How had he seen so much in such a short time? Most people she'd known for years hadn't noticed half of what he just pointed out. She opened her mouth, maybe to defend herself, maybe to deny, but Luca's gaze gentled, stopping her words cold. "I caught you once," he said softly. "I won't watch you fall again." Possessive, protective, almost territorial. Every instinct in Ivy screamed to be cautious, to run, to not get entangled with the man whose name alone made people step out of his path. But there was something else, too. Something warm. Something steady. Something that made her stomach dip and her knees soften in ways that were decidedly unwise. Because Luca wasn't hovering like a predator. He was hovering like a man who had already decided she mattered. "I can walk by myself," she whispered. "I know," he replied, his voice a velvet promise. "But you won't be doing it alone." And as the snow continued falling and the Christmas lights shimmered overhead, Ivy realized something deeply dangerous. She wasn't sure she wanted him to stop. The Christmas market hummed with music and chatter as Luca walked beside her, the crowd parting instinctively in their path. Ivy tried to pretend it was normal, having a man like him at her shoulder, but nothing about him blended. Not his height, not the cut of his coat, not the way the air itself seemed to tense around him, as though waiting for him to speak. She clutched her gift bags tighter, feeling strangely exposed. Luca must have sensed it because he gently took the heaviest one from her hand, without asking. "I can carry that," she protested weakly. "I know," he said, not even looking down. "But I want to." His tone was simple, calm, yet somehow threaded with a subtle finality that made her pulse skip. They passed a vendor selling steaming crocks of spiced hot cocoa. Ivy glanced at the chalkboard menu for 1/2 second. One tiny, fleeting glimpse. Luca changed direction immediately. "You want one," he said, already pulling out cash. "No, really, I'm fine," she insisted. He ignored her entirely. The vendor, a middle-aged woman with rosy cheeks, lit up when she recognized him, then quickly tried to hide the expression. "2 cocoa?" she stammered. "1," Luca corrected, glancing at Ivy. "She likes hers sweet." Ivy's eyebrows shot up. "How would you know that?" "You looked at the marshmallows, not the cinnamon sticks." He shrugged. "Sweet over spiced." It hit her with embarrassing force. He was paying attention. Too much attention. The vendor handed her the cocoa, piled high with whipped cream and soft marshmallows that melted instantly. Luca guided her away from the stall with a hand at the small of her back, the slightest pressure directing her through the thick crowd. She tried to act unaffected. She failed. "What do you do for work?" he asked, voice smooth in the winter air. "Receptionist," she replied slowly, "at a dental office." He hummed thoughtfully. "Do you like it?" "It pays the bills." She took a sip of cocoa. "I trained to be a graphic designer, but life happens, I guess." His eyes flicked to her. "You stopped doing something you love?" She looked down at her boots crunching snow. It didn't feel practical anymore. "Something you love," he repeated as if the words bothered him. "Should never be dismissed as impractical." She adjusted her grip on her cocoa, trying to swallow around the sudden knot in her throat. No one had said anything like that to her in years. They reached the edge of the market, where the crowds thinned and the street lamps cast long golden reflections on the icy ground. Luca didn't stop. He kept pace beside her, steps silent, coat brushing hers every so often. "Where do you live?" he asked. She shot him a wary look. "Why?" "I want to know where you return to when the world is done with you," he said simply. "Is it close?" Her breath hitched. "That's incredibly personal." "Yes." "That wasn't an apology." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." She stared ahead, heart beating too fast. "I'm about 3 blocks from here," he nodded. "Do you always walk alone at night?" "Usually." His jaw tightened just slightly. "I don't like that." A dangerous warmth curled low in her stomach. She shouldn't enjoy the concern. She definitely shouldn't like the way he said, "I don't like that." Like her safety offended him. Like her vulnerability was something he needed to fix personally. They reached her apartment building, the old brick structure looming under a faint layer of snow. She hesitated at the bottom step, turning to face him fully for the first time since he'd caught her. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything tonight?" Luca stepped closer. Too close. His breath mingled with hers in the cold air, his gaze locked onto her face like he was memorizing it. You don't owe me thanks, Ivy. Her lips parted. Then what do I owe you? His hand brushed a snowflake from her hair, so soft it made her shiver. Nothing, he murmured. I'll take care of the rest on my own. She blinked. The rest of what? He didn't answer. He only let his gaze wander over her one last time, lingering with a dark, unreadable heat. I'll see you again, he said. Not a question, not a possibility, just certainty. I don't know about that, she stammered. You will. His voice drifted over her like a promise wrapped in velvet and warning. Some sparks don't go out, Ivy. She stood frozen on her steps, heart hammering, watching as Luca Moretti disappeared into the softly falling snow. A spark she hadn't asked for burned in her chest, and she had the sinking feeling he was right. It wasn't going out. The snow had thickened by the time Ivy reached her apartment after the market. The parking lot behind her building was nearly empty. Just 3 cars dusted with frost and a street lamp flickering like it was losing a fight with the wind. Ivy exhaled a shaky breath and opened her car door. She hadn't expected the evening to linger inside her the way it did. The warmth of Luca's hands, the way he watched her like she was something fragile and luminous. The quiet command woven through everything he said. She shoved the thoughts aside. She needed to get her gifts inside before the snow soaked through the bags. She reached into her back seat and pulled out the first group of presents, balancing them against her hip. The cold bit into her skin, fingers stiffening as she stepped toward the entrance. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until they were too close. Well, well, a voice drawled. Looks like Christmas came early. Ivy froze. The man stepped into the weak pool of light. Hood low, hands buried in his pockets, eyes darting between her and the bags. Her grip tightened. Those are mine, she said, forcing her voice to sound steady. He laughed. Not for long. He lunged. She stumbled backward, nearly losing her footing on the ice. The man jerked the largest gift bag out of her arms, ripping the handle clean off. Ivy gasped and reached instinctively for it. Stop, please! He shoved her. Her back hit the icy trunk of her car, pain flaring up her spine. Fear flooded her chest, hot and fast, her pulse slamming against her throat. The man rifled through the bag, muttering, Let's see what you've got! A shadow detached itself from the alley. She didn't see it at first. She felt it. A shift in the air. A disturbance in the cold. And then, Luca. He stepped into the lamplight with the silent precision of someone built from darkness and steel. His coat billowed behind him in the wind, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the man with a calm that was far more terrifying than rage. Put it down, Luca said quietly. The mugger spun around. Mind your business. The sentence cut off as Luca moved. It wasn't fast. It wasn't frantic. It was lethal efficiency. Controlled. Deliberate. Almost graceful. One step forward, a sharp twist of the wrist, and the man's arm bent in a direction arms weren't meant to bend. He screamed. The gift bag dropped to the snow. Ivy watched in stunned silence as Luca slammed the man against the side of her car with a force that rattled the windows. The mugger tried to fight back, an elbow, a kick, but Luca handled him the way a storm handles a dying flame, without mercy, without hesitation. Touch her again, Luca murmured, voice low enough to vibrate through the air, and I'll break more than your arm. The man sobbed, the fight draining from him instantly. Luca released him just long enough for the guy to shove off the car and sprint away into the night. Ivy released the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands shook violently, her knees weak beneath her. Luca turned to her. The transformation was jarring. One moment he was a weapon honed by years of darkness. The next, all that brutality melted into raw, palpable concern. Are you hurt? He asked, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. She shook her head, unable to speak. He cupped her face with both hands, the warmth of his palms sinking into her cheeks, grounding her back into her body. His eyes, still sharp, still dangerous, softened as he scanned her for injuries. "He pushed you," Luca murmured, thumb brushing the spot where her shoulder had hit the car. "You could have cracked your head. You could have—" I'm fine," Ivy whispered, even though her voice trembled. "No," Luca said, voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a vow. "You're shaken." His thumb traced the edge of her lip, the faintest touch, but it felt like lightning. Her breath hitched. "You shouldn't be out here alone." She swallowed. "I didn't think—" "I know," he said gently. "You didn't expect trouble." He leaned in, his forehead nearly brushing hers. "But trouble comes for soft hearts in hard cities, Ivy." Her chest tightened painfully. "And what about you?" she whispered. "Why are you here?" His lips curved, not in a smile, in something more dangerous. "I told you," he murmured. "You're not walking alone anymore." The snow drifted quietly around them, settling on his shoulders, melting in her hair. Luca stayed close, closer than he'd allowed himself before, his breath warm against her cold cheeks. She wasn't sure which frightened her more, the man who had nearly stolen her gifts, or the man who looked at her like he'd kill the whole world before letting her slip again. Luca didn't let go of her hand even after the attacker disappeared into the snowy dark. His grip wasn't harsh, nothing like the man who'd been slamming someone against a car moments earlier, but firm, steady, anchoring. A contradiction wrapped in heat and winter air. Ivy barely had time to process what happened before he pulled her gently toward her building. "Come on," he murmured, voice low. "You shouldn't be out here another second." Her legs felt like half-melted ice cubes. She wasn't sure she could walk without him. The adrenaline had drained too fast, leaving her shaky and hollow. Inside the lobby, the flickering overhead lights hummed and cast a weak, yellow glow over the cracked tile floor. Ivy shoved her keys into her coat pocket with trembling fingers, trying and failing to hide the shaking. Luca noticed immediately. He lifted her hands before she could tuck them away, holding them between his palms like something delicate. Her breath caught. His hands were warm, so warm and broad enough to swallow hers whole. But it wasn't the size that made her heart stutter. It was the gentleness. Slow, careful, intentional. He examined her fingers, her knuckles, the soft skin of her palms. Every brush of his thumb sent sparks dancing under her skin. She wasn't sure if he knew he was touching her like that, like he had all the time in the world to memorize the shape of her hands, or if it was simply his instinct. "It's just the cold," she whispered. "No," he corrected quietly. "It's fear." Her eyes snapped up to his. His expression softened, but his eyes were still storm-heavy, still carrying the echo of the violence he'd unleashed minutes earlier. "Ivy," he murmured, voice deeper, rougher. "If you had slipped tonight, if you had hit the ground when he pushed you." He inhaled sharply, jaw flexing as though he couldn't finish the thought. Then he lifted her hands higher, to eye level, like he was showing her something sacred. "I would have killed the ice itself." Her lips parted, no breath coming through. He said it so seriously, so fiercely, as if ice were a living enemy he could hunt down and punish, as if a cracked wrist or a bruised elbow were worth declaring war over. "Luca," she whispered, not sure if she was scolding him or falling apart in front of him. "You're being dramatic." "Not dramatic," he murmured. "Honest." He lowered her hands but didn't release them. Instead, his thumb drifted across the inside of her wrist, tracing a pulse that was racing far too fast. A faint crease appeared between his brows as he watched it hammer beneath her skin. "You're frightened," he said. "Your heart shouldn't beat this fast because of fear." "And what should it be beating fast for?" she challenged softly before she could think better of it. Luca's eyes lifted to hers slowly. Heat curled through the space between them. His voice dropped to a whisper that felt like it wrapped around her spine. Me. Her breath broke on a gasp. He stepped closer, not touching her beyond their linked hands, but close enough that the warmth radiating off him stole the remaining cold from her bones. The lobby suddenly felt too small, the lights too dim, the world too quiet, except for their uneven breaths. I shouldn't be here, she whispered. This is too much. I know, Luca said. I didn't plan it. I didn't expect it. He leaned in slightly, voice brushing her ear. But the moment you fell, before I even caught you, something in me reacted. Ivy swallowed. Reacted? His thumb stroked her wrist again. Claimed. Her knees nearly gave out. Luca steadied her with a hand at her waist. A familiar touch now, frightening in its sureness. His fingers spread over the curve of her hip like he was grounding them both. You're trembling, he murmured again, softer this time. I'm fine, she tried. No, Luca whispered. You're not. His gaze flicked to her lips, then back to her eyes. But you will be. How do you know? Because I'm right here, he said, voice barely audible. And nothing. Not ice, not thieves, not this city, touches what I hold. His words sank into her like heat, like danger, like a promise she wasn't ready for, and yet couldn't step away from. Luca, she breathed. He held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. An understanding, a warning, a pull neither of them could break. Then, softly, reverently, he let one hand slide up to her cheek. I told you, he murmured, thumb brushing her skin like a caress. You're not falling again. Not in the snow, not in the dark, not in life, not while he existed to stop it. Ivy woke the next morning with the vague sensation that the night before had been a dream. Too intense, too unreal, too warm in places that still pulsed when she touched them. Luca's hands, Luca's voice, Luca's terrifying gentleness. It all clung to her like snowfall on lashes. She pressed her palms to her cheeks, remembering how he'd held her face as if it was something breakable, remembering the low promise in his voice. You're not falling again. She'd barely slept after that. But sunlight had a way of flattening fantasy, reminding her that last night had been madness. A Mafia boss appearing from nowhere, protecting her, touching her like she mattered. She made coffee, wrapped herself in her scarf, and headed out her apartment door. Normal day. Ordinary life. No Luca Moretti. No violent shadows. No pulse-racing danger. She stepped outside, tugging her coat tighter. And froze. Across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost, was a man in a black coat. Sunglasses. Earpiece. Another stood at the corner, and another beside the coffee shop. They didn't move, didn't talk, didn't even pretend to blend in. They just watched her. Her stomach dropped. No, he didn't. Ivy blinked rapidly, hoping, praying their outlines would blur into something harmless. But they sharpened instead, each one subtly shifting his weight, like wolves adjusting their stance when prey stepped into view. Except she wasn't the prey. They bowed their heads to her, not deeply, just enough to acknowledge her presence. A greeting, a warning, a claim. Her breath hitched. No, she whispered under her breath. Absolutely not. She marched down the steps, hands balled in her pockets, trying to swallow the feeling that the entire street had tilted. One of the men straightened at her movement, speaking into his sleeve microphone. Oh my God. She hurried through the snow, heart pounding harder with every crunch of boots on pavement. She wasn't imagining it. The man nearest her stepped into pace behind her, keeping distance but matching her stride exactly. She whipped around. Stop following me! He blinked. Once, calmly. I'm not following you, ma'am, he said. I'm protecting you. She nearly choked. Why? A faint hint of sympathy flickered in his eyes. Mr. Moretti's orders. Her pulse flatlined and then spiked painfully. "I didn't agree to this," she snapped, voice trembling. "I didn't ask for guards." "You didn't have to." Her stomach flipped. "That's not how this works." "Ma'am," he said gently, "that's exactly how it works." Ivy's mind spun. She backed up until her boots hit the curb. She wasn't sure if she was furious, terrified, flattered, or a messed-up mixture of all three. Last night she'd felt safe, held, protected in a way she'd never experienced. This morning, she felt owned. She forced herself to breathe, to make sense of the situation. Luca hadn't asked. Luca hadn't checked. Luca had simply decided. Because in his world, deciding and protecting were the same thing. She tried again, softer this time. "Please, tell him to stop. I don't want this." The guard didn't smile, but something in his expression softened, like he knew she had no idea what she was asking. "I'm afraid he won't accept that answer," he said. "But you can tell him yourself." She froze. "Tell him myself?" He nodded once, tilting his head slightly. Ivy followed the gesture, and her breath left her body. At the corner of the street, leaning against a sleek black car dusted with snow, stood Luca Moretti, hands in pockets, coat open despite the cold, watching her with an expression that shouldn't have made her knees weaken, but did, because he looked different this morning. Not like the man who caught her from falling. Not like the man who fought off a mugger with terrifying ease. He looked like a man who had made a decision during the night, and was here to enforce it. His eyes traveled slowly from her boots to her coat to her face, taking her in, checking for new injuries, lingering with a possessiveness that stole her breath. When their eyes locked, a shiver raced down her spine. She whispered without meaning to, "Oh no." He pushed off the car and started walking toward her. His men stepped aside as if the ground shifted beneath them. Ivy stood frozen in the middle of the sidewalk, heart pounding so loud she felt it behind her eyes. Luca stopped in front of her, looking her over with a careful, intimate scrutiny that made her lungs tighten. "You're shaking," he murmured. "Because there are men everywhere," she hissed. "You noticed," he said, as if he were pleased. "Of course Luca, you can't just assign guards to me." He stepped closer. The cold didn't dare touch the space between them. "You were attacked last night," he said quietly, "while I was there. What happens when I'm not?" "I'll be careful." "No," she flinched. He took her gloved hands in his bare ones, pulling her closer, lowering his voice until it wrapped around her like heat. "You slip," he whispered. "You fall. You draw danger without realizing it. And whether you agree to it or not, I protect what I catch." Her breath stuttered. She wasn't sure which terrified her more. That she wanted to argue, or that a part of her didn't want to. Snow still dusted the city streets, softening edges and hiding cracks, but beneath the winter calm, danger moved like a shadow with its own pulse. Ivy had no idea how close it was. Not until it was too late. After her confrontation with Luca outside her building, she'd insisted on going to work alone. She'd insisted the guards back off, insisted Luca give her space, insisted she wasn't someone who needed rescuing. He'd stared at her for a long, unreadable moment, and then let her go. Or so she thought. Now, walking down the crowded street toward her job, she tried to convince herself that everything was fine. Normal. Her life hadn't changed overnight. She wasn't tangled in something dangerous, something she didn't understand. "Just breathe," she whispered, tugging her scarf tighter. She pushed open the door to the cafe where she worked, the warm smell of cinnamon and espresso wrapping around her like a hug. The bells above the door jingled cheerfully. Customers laughed. Someone wiped snow off their boots. Ordinary. Ivy clung to the feeling. She tied on her apron, pushed her hair back, and headed toward the counter when she noticed two men she didn't recognize sitting near the window. Dark coats, heavy boots, no drinks in front of them. They weren't watching the street. They were watching her. A chill slid down her spine. She tried to dismiss it. People stared sometimes, especially in a small cafe. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they liked the holiday decorations. But the way their eyes followed her, cold, calculating, assessing. Her heart began to thrum painfully. When she turned to grab a tray, one of the men pulled out his phone and typed something. The other nodded almost imperceptibly. Ivy's throat tightened. Number. It couldn't be. She backed into the counter, fumbling for the espresso machine like she could hide behind it. Her coworker Jamie frowned. You okay? You look pale. I'm fine, she lied, voice thin. But when she looked back toward the men, they were gone. Just 2 empty chairs, 2 untouched napkins, 2 impressions in the snow by the door. And then, a shadow fell across the counter. Ivy spun around and nearly collided with a broad chest wrapped in a black wool coat. Luca, she gasped. What are you doing here? He didn't answer, not with words. His hand slid to her waist in a slow, deliberate motion. Not to touch her, not to claim her, but to check that she was real. His fingers pressed lightly, as if ensuring she wasn't hurt. His jaw flexed once. You were followed, he murmured. Her stomach dropped. Luca, you were targeted, he continued, voice low, lethal. By someone who thought they could use you to reach me. His eyes, God, those eyes, were darker than she'd ever seen them. Storm dark. War dark. You need to come with me, he said. She shook her head, breath trembling. Luca, I can't just leave work, One of his guards approached from behind, whispering something into Luca's ear. Whatever it was, his entire body went rigid. Then he lifted his gaze to hers, stepping even closer, crowding out the world. They saw you before I did, he said, each word a quiet blade. That will not happen again. Ivy felt her knees weaken, not because of fear, though fear was there, but because of the terrifying intensity in his voice. The cafe suddenly felt too exposed, too open, too unsafe. Luca, she whispered, what's happening? He cupped the back of her neck, guiding her gently but firmly toward the back exit of the cafe. You're being hunted, he said. Her breath stuttered. By who? A family foolish enough to think your life will leash me. His voice softened in a way that contradicted every razor edge of his expression. They believe you're a weakness. His thumb brushed her throat, calming and possessive all at once. They don't understand, he murmured. You are the reason they should fear me. Her pulse hammered so loud she could barely hear anything else. She stumbled slightly, and Luca caught her immediately, hands firm, steady, protective in a way that made the world tilt. Stay close, he said, guiding her through the door into the alley behind the cafe, where a sleek black car waited. From this moment on, you do not walk alone. You do not go anywhere without my men. You do not disappear from my sight. She swallowed hard. Luca, this is too much. He turned her to face him fully, snowflakes melting on his coat, his gaze burning straight through her. This is not too much, he said softly. This is necessary. And if I say no? He stepped closer, so close her breath caught. Then I protect you anyway. Her voice barely escaped her. Why me? Luca's jaw clenched. Because you slipped, he whispered. And when I caught you, I didn't let go. His palm brushed her cheek in a heartbreakingly gentle touch before he guided her into the waiting car, sealing her fate before she even understood what it was. The door closed. The danger closed in. And Ivy realized she hadn't just stepped into Luca's world. She'd been dragged into the center of it. Because someone else saw her first. And Luca would burn the city before letting them touch her. Snow fell in soft, delicate flakes, too gentle, too peaceful for the violence waiting beneath it. Ivy pushed open the back door of the cafe after her shift, breath fogging in the frigid air. She scanned the alley automatically, the habit becoming second nature since Luca's warning. His guards had been nearby all day, until suddenly, an hour ago, they'd vanished. She'd texted Mateo, one of the guards. No response. Her stomach twisted with unease. "Just get to the bus stop," she whispered, hugging her coat tighter. The alley was quiet. Too quiet. Even the wind held its breath. She took 3 steps. A shadow peeled away from the wall. Then another. Before she could scream, a gloved hand clamped over her mouth, dragging her backward. The cold metal of a gun pressed into her ribs. Ivy's heart convulsed as she kicked, fought, tried to wrench free. "Don't struggle!" A voice hissed in her ear. "We only need you long enough to bring Moretti to his knees." Her terror spiked. Rival family. The ones who'd watched her in the cafe. The ones who wanted to use her as leverage. Not leverage. Bait. A van screeched up beside them. The back door slid open. Ivy thrashed so hard her vision blurred, boots slipping on the snow, hands tearing at the man's wrist. "She's fighting. She'll stop once we—" They didn't get to finish. A roar split through the alley. A sound she had only heard once before, when Luca's temper snapped like a cord pulled too tight. And then, a black car exploded around the corner, tires skidding on snow, engines snarling like an unleashed beast. The headlights cut through the darkness, blinding the kidnappers. In the same breath, the driver's door was flung open. Luca. He moved with a speed that defied physics. One moment he was 10 feet away. The next, the man holding Ivy was flying backward, slammed into the brick wall so hard snow fell from the fire escape above. Ivy stumbled, dizzy, breathless, straight into Luca's arms. He caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her clean off her feet. His hands shook violently around her waist and her back, gripping her like she might vanish if he blinked. "Dio santo," he breathed, voice ragged. "Ivy." She'd never heard him sound like that, like a man who had just watched his world shatter and barely snatched it back together in time. Her fingers curled into his coat. "Luca, look at me." He framed her face gently but firmly. Snow clung to his dark hair. His breathing was uneven, almost broken. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you? Did they—" "They tried," she whispered. The temperature in the alley changed. The snow didn't melt, but the air felt scorched. Luca turned his head toward the men struggling to rise. The expression on his face made Ivy's blood run cold and warm all at once. Something ancient, something dark, something that would set the world on fire for her. "You tried to take what's mine," Luca said, voice too calm to be anything but lethal. What followed was a blur of motion, silent, efficient, terrifying. His guards arrived seconds later, but they weren't needed. Luca fought like a storm given human form. Every blow calculated. Every strike a message. Nobody touches her. Nobody takes her. Nobody tries. Within moments, the kidnappers were disarmed, groaning on the ground, weapons kicked into the snow. But Luca didn't look at them. He looked only at her. When he came back to Ivy, he didn't let her feet touch the ground. He held her tighter, one arm under her legs, the other wrapped around her back, pulling her against his chest as if carrying someone fragile, something priceless. As if carrying something that nearly broke. "I got to you too late," he whispered into her hair. "You got to me," she said back, voice trembling. His chest rose sharply like her words struck something deep inside him. He brushed snowflakes off her cheek with a shaking thumb. "I will never let anything happen to you," he murmured, voice thick with a vow that tasted like forever. "Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever." She rested her forehead against his, heart hammering in sync with his. Luca. But he wasn't done. He tightened his hold, lifting her even closer, eyes burning with a wild mix of fear, fury, and something impossibly tender. "They could have taken you from me," he rasped, "and I would have turned this entire city into a graveyard." Ivy didn't know what to say, didn't know how to breathe. All she could do was hold on to him, and let him hold her, like she was already his. Snow drifted from the sky like soft, glittering confetti, catching on scarves, eyelashes, and twinkling lights that wrapped around every wooden stall of the Christmas market. The air was alive with music, warm pastries, and the laughter of families weaving through the crowds. And in the middle of all of it, Ivy stood with her hands tucked into her coat pockets, heart stumbling in her chest. She hadn't planned to come back here, the place where everything began. The slip, the fall, the catch that changed her life. But Luca had asked her to meet him somewhere important. And before she could talk herself out of it, she said yes. Now her breath puffed white in the cold air as she waited beneath a string of golden lights, her pulse skittering with every passing second. Then, a shadow broke away from the crowd. Tall, steady, dark coat dusted with snow. Moving toward her with a purpose that made her knees go weak. Luca. Her chest tightened painfully. He looked different tonight. Less sharp, less controlled, more human. But the moment their eyes met, the intensity she knew well ignited behind his gaze. He didn't speak at first. He simply reached her, cupped the sides of her face with cold, strong hands, and rested his forehead against hers like he needed the contact to breathe. "Ivy," he murmured, voice roughened by something deeper than exhaustion. "Thank you for coming." She swallowed hard. "I thought, after everything last night, maybe you'd want distance." He let out a sound that was almost a scoff, except softer, like she'd said something heartbreaking. "Distance?" he echoed, fingers sliding slowly down to her jaw. "After holding you while you shook in my arms? After seeing what would have happened if I had been 1 minute later?" His breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. "No, Ivy. Distance is the last thing I want." Her heart thudded painfully, the world around them dissolving into warm lights and falling snow. Before she could respond, Luca's hand slipped to the small of her back, drawing her into the solid heat of his chest. His arm wrapped around her waist with a certainty that stole her breath. He leaned in, lips brushing the shell of her ear. "You slipped into my arms once," he whispered, the words vibrating against her skin. "You're not slipping out of them again." Her breath caught. The world froze. Even the snow seemed to hang in the air. "Luca!" It came out barely audible, half a plea, half a confession. He pulled back enough to look at her fully. His eyes were dark, yes, but softened by something that made her stomach flip. A longing so deep it felt etched into his bones. "This place," he said quietly, glancing around the market. "I've walked through it 100 times. I've never stopped, never cared. And then you fell into me, literally. And suddenly, I haven't been able to stop thinking about the woman who stumbled into my life and didn't flinch when she realized who I was." A snowflake landed in her hair. He brushed it away with a touch so gentle it made her breath tremble. "You changed something in me," he continued. "I don't know how you did it. I don't know why. I only know that the moment you fell, I caught more than your body." Her chest tightened, warmth blooming through her in slow, overwhelming waves. He lifted her hand, pressing it to his chest where his heartbeat thundered under her palm. "You caught this," he murmured. Ivy's lips parted in shock. "Luca." "Don't run from it," he said, stepping closer until their bodies brushed. "Don't run from me." The music from a nearby stall drifted through the cold air, soft, slow, impossibly romantic. Couples swayed together in the snow, and then Luca extended his hand toward her, not forceful, not demanding, an invitation, not wrapped in danger, but in honesty. "One dance," he murmured. The one we didn't get the night you fell." Her fingers trembled as she placed her hand in his. He pulled her against him, fitting her to his chest, his chin brushing her hair. They swayed slowly beneath the lights, her breath sinking with his, her fears melting like snowflakes on warm skin. "Why me?" she whispered, unable to hold the question inside any longer. His lips touched her temple in the softest, most reverent kiss. "Because fate doesn't make mistakes," he said. "You weren't falling that day, Ivy." His hand tightened on her waist. "You were being delivered." Her eyes stung. Snowflakes sparkled in her lashes. "And now?" she whispered. He lowered his mouth to her ear, voice low enough to melt her from the inside out. "Now," he said, "you're the one thing I refuse to let slip away." The snow swirled around them. The lights glowed warmer. Her heart surrendered completely. Ivy finally understood. The fall wasn't an accident. It was the beginning of being chosen.